The boys heard a violent pounding from the vicinity of a closet at the end of the hall. "Don't let him out," shrieked the nurse. "He'll murder us all." "It's a Chinaman," screamed Aunt Gertrude.
All righty. To all the members present and worldwide, I hereby call this meeting of the Piece of Shit Book Club to order. I'm your esteemed chair, Grant C. Ashcroft, and thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to attend this meeting today. We got a jam-packed agenda, and looking around the room, I see we don't quite have quorum, but let's go with it anyhow. Before we get things rolling, let's take a minute to introduce the Piece of Shit members present today. Chip Wilson, thanks so much for making time in your schedule, Chip.
Hey, good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Good day. And joining as ever is our resident young adult Orientalism literature expert, Dr. Bo Dashington, PhD. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I mean, you know me. You invite me, I turn up on the dot, on time. You never have to wait a second for me. I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Much appreciated. And also joining us is, oh no, not Jane Lynch, because Jane Lynch slept in and has punked us. So let's see if Jane decides to show up for his own podcast later on.
Might I add, after requesting, we changed the recording day.
Yeah, 100% correct. We're recording this on a different day at his request, and then he punks us. That's a real power move. So I'm doing fantastic today, by the way. Thanks for asking. Not to get off on a little tangent here, but I have been putting off getting a physical for years. And this week I decided to get a bunch of tests done. And I opened my test results right before the podcast today. I'm the picture of health.
Clean as a whistle.
Congratulations.
I got high cholesterol, but aced the HIV test. Like just totally massive.
Like no one's ever seen.
Yeah. No one's ever seen the ultrasound. So I got everything done. I got like urine, stool, blood, x-rays, heart monitor, full abdominal scan. The ultrasound doctor told me I had the best, like this guy just spends his whole day doing dozens of ultrasounds. He said, this is the best one I've seen all day. But the cherry on top, and I'm putting this out as a challenge. This is not primal blue chip club talk. I am a high T boy officially. So got my T checked. I'm off the charts. There's a reference interval for men aged 20 to 50, and I am above the reference interval.
Okay.
I'm even beating 20-year-olds.
Okay, careful with phrasing, but
an insane amount of testosterone just coursing through my blood right now. So just look out.
Well, congrats. It sounds like you're very comfortable with your body, feeling good.
And if you guys want to go for like a tea challenge, I'm happy to put it out to anyone out there.
Let's reflect on that and we'll get back to you.
All right. Well, like getting back to the business at hand here for today's book. This one's, wow, we're really reaching into the shit pile today. So picture this. It's 1933. Anti-Asian sentiment is at a fever pitch. Immigration from Asian countries is strictly banned. Fears of yellow peril dominate the tabloid press. And into that toxic atmosphere steps the Hardy Boys, two pint-sized detectives who are mostly known for solving small-town mysteries. Yes, it's Frank W. Dixon's Footprints Under the Window. So ostensibly, it's about an evil Chinese human trafficker. The dialogue in this book is so rife with cartoonishly offensive caricatures of Chinese people that all of the podcast members have refused to read any passages today. So from what I understand, we brought in a special guest star to do the racist heavy lifting, I think. But yeah. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see how that works out. Before we step on that landmine, though, of course, as we always do, we need to crack open the book report. So the book report is our grab bag segment of news, doings, happenings, and new releases. Before I open it up to the members assembled here, just a little bit of quick housekeeping. So the majority of our listeners are coming to us from Apple iTunes, but we don't actually have any reviews there yet. So if you're a Tim Apple fanboy, fangirl, take a second and give us a review. You'd be doing us a big favor. Your name will be automatically inducted into the Piece of Shit Book Club honor roll. An extremely exclusive group of people, seeing as I just made it up. All right, book boys, what's on your mind?
Can I just say I've got a couple points that are slightly relevant, maybe slightly not. Firstly, calling this segment the book report has always confused me, because to me the book report is like the big report on one book, like you do at school. It's too late to be changing the names of stuff. What do we even call the main segment?
I thought it was like the feature.
The feature,
main feature,
deep dive. Look, if you have great ideas as to what you want to call the book report, then have at it.
The main section is called the book report part 2, the real book
report. 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
So point number 2.
Point number 2, which is just, I was listening to last week's podcast, and when our previous week's host, whatever his name is, was talking about the aliens, he kept making references to the Jetsons. This week, we're talking about the fucking Hardy Boys. The episode before that, we were talking about the important distinctions between Lonnie Anderson and Goldie Hawn. I think we should...
Which are important.
Which are all very important. I think we're making ourselves seem significantly older than we actually are. Like that's not none of that stuff's our generation. That's all at least one, if not 2 generations before us. Why are our references so dated and shit? Grant used the word punked 3 times in the intro. No one said punk since 2008.
Yeah, but that's our generation. Guys get punked, in the aughts and the late 90s. Everyone was getting punked back then. Like, you couldn't stop Ashton Kutcher.
If we want some more recent references, I could start working some like Star Trek Deep Space Nine stuff into it, I think.
Yeah.
I've been doing a rewatch of classic Law and Order. That's about as recent as I'm getting these days.
Well, nice. God. Watching perps get punked.
Exactly. Okay, well, I don't think we're going to have updated references in this book. You've read it. You've heard the terminology that's employed in this week's feature book. Don't count on anything. I think it was antiquated even for the 1930s. So, okay, point number 2. And moving along, point number 3.
I don't have a point number 3. That's all my points. I see the rest of my time.
You didn't read anything? Nothing you want to contribute to the book report in terms of...
And I read books, but I don't read books that are relevant for a discussion about pieces of shit literature. Okay. But I suppose maybe quick chat on like what we've been talking about reading for next week. We've been talking about Tyra Banks' Model Land. We've been talking about reading one of those James Patterson books, because James Patterson is like, he's one of the, if not the best-selling author of all time. He's right up there, but he is accused of using ghostwriters, and he's written books with Bill Clinton and with Hillary Clinton. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
And the Russell Brand book, but we were waiting for his trial to commence.
Well, I mean, I proposed Model Land. I'd kind of like to do it because I took a little peek. I read some of it, and it's just so batshit. And there's almost this like unintentional body horror component to the way that Tyra Banks writes. And I'm pretty sure that one's distinct. That like, I think she actually did write it. It's not just some like ghost written thing, because it's far too strange for like a professional writer to put together. So that's one I'm really interested in.
And it probably ticks your box of modern references. I'm sure it's geared towards Gen Alpha. It's all about mogging and...
Yeah, but isn't Tyra Banks, like, she was really popular like 20 years ago, wasn't she?
Yeah.
I mean, that
just makes you sound even older, that you think she's modern.
Yeah, I could go with models. I really try not to get too involved in the book selection. I'm just here to moderate and make sure that we have a well-run meeting that adheres to Robert's rules. Really, that's kind of what I see my role as.
I do like with a lot of the threads that we've been pursuing, because like a lot of the narratives or social movements that the books reflect, they have these like weird origins. Like there's modern grifters, let's say, but there's like a generation of grifters or 2 generations or 3 that precede them. And so I think it is sometimes interesting to kind of go back to the origin of some topics. And on that, I don't know if you can see what I'm sharing here, but what I was going to bring for the book report, actually a friend found this, A Circle of Men, which is a 92, the original manual for men's support groups. So it's got all this details on how you start a new men's group, running your training, making a safe space for risk-taking, opening to the male mode of feeling. And for existing men's groups, he's got guides on creating rituals, what to expect as your group matures, dealing with problems, going deeper, missing fathers, our wounds as men. So
the cover has a picture of a bunch of men on it, and it looks like a group of men on the dole.
It certainly does.
Or maybe up to no good.
So I think this guy is co-founder. This is from Bill Koth, sorry, or Koth, I'm not sure, but co-founder of the New Warrior Training Adventure. So I'm pretty sure these are the guys where you go and it's like a weekend training thing where you kind of be wild man, something like that.
They scream at you and call you a pussy.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So that's one that I've got in hard copy.
Well, actually, on that note, I've got there's a great new release that I'm keeping an eye on. That's actually right up your alley if you're into men's groups. So it's called The Man of Zero: A Guide to Primal Power, Boundless Sex, and the Freedom Beyond Ambition by this guy, David Dida. I'm going to read from the back cover. This might appeal. It appeals to me greatly. It might appeal to you as well. When you don't want to do anything and life feels meaningless, what's the next step? Zero motivation can be a portal to a deeper way of living. The Man of Zero shows a way to relax through the doorway of emptiness into a freedom more powerful than sex and more boundless than success. Written in short chapters of essential instructions that evoke immediate insight and experience, Dida shows how to live your life while resting as zero, being effortlessly present, aware, and complete without the need for striving.
Without the need for striving?
Yeah. Man of Zero. Number one new release in men's gender studies, 2631 on hardcover. And it came out 12th of May, 2026. So it's already out there if you wanted to pick it up and see how you can live your life as a zero.
Men's gender studies is kind of a funny phrase. Sounds like it's like gender studies, but only under the control of men. You know what I mean? Or only done by men.
Right.
Patriarchy studies.
Yeah.
Also, there's a tremendous amount of patriotic literature that's coming up for the 250th anniversary of July 4th.
Oh, God.
So there's a lot of great ones to choose from. There's America, I'm So Glad You Were Born, Celebrating the Country We Love by Ainsley Earhart. You know her and love her from Fox and Friends. There's All American Patriotism, celebrating 250 years of America's greatness. There is Revolution, the Birth of the Greatest Nation in the History of the World by Steve Deese. And those are just a few of the many patriotic titles that are on Amazon's new releases. The America, I'm So Glad You Were Born is number one bestseller in children's Independence Day books. So it's a tough category to be number one, but Ainsley has done it.
Congrats.
Also, and the last book that we're keeping an eye on this week, new release, this is Unburdened, a memoir by a lady named Dorrit Kemsley. You know her from The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. It's a candid memoir in which she reveals the unscripted moments that shaped who she is today. She reveals the true stories behind hashtag Pantygate and hashtag Puppygate, and the terrifying home invasion that shattered her sense of security, the disillusion of her marriage, and the pressure of living under constant public scrutiny. 256 pages, 2060 on hardcover, just came out June 2nd. So it's available. And 3.8 stars on Amazon. Number one bestseller in television performer biographies. 3.8 stars, you might think it's not that good. But if you look at Hitler 1941 to 1944, Inside the Fuhrer Bunker, written by Adolf Hitler, that's got 3.73 stars out of 5. So it's slightly edging out
right up there.
Adolf Hitler's from Inside the Fuhrer Bunker.
Why is this book a piece of shit? Like, it's not a topic that I find interesting, Diary of a Real Housewives person, but is she running some grift or something? Or is it just...
Why you got to step on my contributions to the book reporter? It's
just asking.
It's a memoir from a lady on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. You think it's going to be a great piece of literature?
I just read a book by a former cast member of Survivor called Rob Cesternino, a book called The Tribe and I Have Spoken. And it's just about the reality TV show. It's nothing, it doesn't claim to be anything else. It's just about Survivor. I fucking loved it. It was a great book.
All right, well, maybe you want to pick up Unburdened then. This might be right up your alley.
My point was that, like, it might be, I wonder if it's a good book for the people who are really into Real Housewives and just not of interest to anyone else.
Can I include a memoir that's maybe not a piece of shit, since we all have?
Please.
Fifth Chinese Daughter by Jade Snow Wong. This is one I got that's like the original 1950. It's like the memoir of a young woman growing up Chinese in the US. Like it's a second generation.
Did I give that to you as a present?
I think you did.
Yeah. I think I brought it from, I was in Hotlanta and found this
Ooh.
old bookstore, and for some reason saw that and picked it up
This
to
is a
you as a
nice
present.
piece. Well, there you go. A little bit of book club lore as well, showcasing our friendship dating back nearly decades now. Topical for the Hardy Boys' take on Chinese immigration. Interesting to kind of see the perspective of someone who grew up at that time in the 1930s in the U.S. But it's kind of interesting, though. I was just looking a little bit at online discourse about it, and like a lot of people don't like it in retrospect because it's sort of the story of her being like a kind of model immigrant and assimilating and so on. So people have their critiques of that. But nonetheless, it's a pretty good reader, an important part of, you know what I mean, the immigrant story in the
All
U.S.
that
for the
stuff,
Chinese
yeah.
community.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah,
All
that
that
sort of
stuff.
thing, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, look, I just read a book on Chinese immigration, all right? I don't need to read another one.
And so closes this chapter's book report. Thank you for your contributions, piece of shit book club members. I will now cede the floor to Dr. Bo Dashington, PhD, for our feature segment on Footprints Under the Window by Frank W. Dixon. Take it away, Dr. Dashington.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm not really sure why we decided to do the Hardy Boys this week, but yeah, we're doing the Hardy Boys. So this is actually book number 12 in the Hardy Boys series, and it was published in 1933. Part of a successful series. It was deemed so racist so quickly that the publishers rewrote the whole thing within 20 years. But we'll get to that. But yeah, the Hardy Boys. We've got our own history with the Hardy Boys. Grant, I think you said at the beginning that you read the Hardy Boys when you were a kid.
Yeah, I love the Hardy Boys growing up. I had a few of the books on hardcover. Just kind of fun, innocent, small town mystery detective stories. It's really accessible. They're fast paced, and they use actually a lot of advanced language for a YA book. So yeah, it always kind of appealed to me. It seemed wholesome.
I think in a way we're sort of like the Hardy Boys of book clubs, sort of digging deep into the mysteries behind some ne'er-do-wells, with a bit of juvenile humor thrown in there.
Let's take that as a compliment for getting all the racism parts that we're right about to discuss. Before we get to that, before we dive into the book, because not everyone out there may be sort of up to speed with who the Hardy Boys are and what they represented. This series was produced by this book packager called Edward Stratemeyer, who basically pioneered the model of publishing lots and lots of books in a series and producing them at really low cost and getting ghostwriters to write. So the Hardy Boys series is all written under the pseudonym Franklin W. Dixon, but he didn't actually exist. And there were many other ghostwriters that wrote the books that were published. And this model was one that was like a little bit exploitative of the authors. Like they had no rights to the book afterwards. During the Great Depression, he slashed their wages because he realized he could pay them a hell of a lot less. So not necessarily the nicest guy, but created this extremely influential series. Depending on how you count, there's 190 books in the original Hardy Boys mystery stories, which is the main canon series. But there's a number of other series of books since, and the total is actually almost 500 books have been published in the Hardy Boys. The first one published 1927. It's their 99th birthday this year. And it's kind of hard to exaggerate how huge the Hardy Boys were. Like I think probably nowadays no one really thinks about the Hardy Boys, but they sold 70 million copies, which is a hell of a lot of copies of books. You know, in the time period we're talking about, and to draw a comparison with other series, it's about the same amount of books that Winnie the Pooh sold, and only a little bit less than the Song of Ice and Fire series, the Game of Thrones series.
What about Last Meeting? Wasn't it 70 million that Chariots of the Gods sold, or do I have that wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go.
So it's like about as influential as Chariots of the Gods.
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
There you go. That's amazing. What a compliment. The compliments just keep coming.
But even like I didn't read the Hardy Boys as a kid, but like obviously growing up, it felt like you automatically knew what the Hardy Boys were, the whole thing.
I had a bunch of the books, but I never read a single page of one of them. I don't know why. I read a lot as a kid, but never had the slightest interest in them. You
talked a little bit about this Stratemeyer Syndicate. You know, you mentioned that these guys, it was this publisher. Later, it passed on to his daughters. His daughters would write the treatment. So it would be an outline, and then they would give it to the ghostwriter in order to finish. The ghostwriter of this piece was the book we're reading this week, this guy named Leslie McFarlane, who was actually a Canadian journalist.
Yeah.
And he abhorred this work. He was paid, as you say, somewhere in the neighborhood of $85 to $100 per book. He didn't get any residuals. There's some fun quotes from him. This is from his journal, 1933. So this came out right around the same time that this book was published. Quote, tried to get at the juvenile again today, but the ghastly job appalls me. Stratemeyer sent along the advance, so I was able to pay part of the grocery bill and get a load of dry wood. So, I mean, he lives in like wintry northern Ontario, where if you don't have dry wood, you're going to freeze.
You die.
To death. Yeah. They'd give him an outline, but to make it palatable, he'd come up with different characters. He'd add color, huge, large words. And then when he'd finish, he'd always say, like, I'm never going to write another one of these pieces of crap again. And a lot of the secrets of this Stratemeyer Syndicate came out during a civil case when they tried to switch publishers in the 80s. And so a lot of them had to go on record. They had to testify. They had to do depositions. And it came out like exactly how sleazy the practices of this the syndicate was. So ghostwriters weren't allowed to contact one another. They couldn't identify themselves. They weren't even told how many other ghostwriters were working for a Hardy Boys franchise or any of the other popular franchises they ran, because they didn't want these ghostwriters to unionize. They couldn't discuss pay rates. And there was also a lot of like corporate espionage on them. So they kept invasive dossiers on the writers' personal lives, financial desperations, their families. And they'd use all of this as leverage in order to keep the per book rates as low as possible and suppress any sort of requests for royalties. So a real sleazy operation from top to bottom.
Yeah, it's that's what came through to me as well. It's like just how, in retrospect, how like exploitative and like, I don't know, cold-blooded capitalist the Hardy Boys were at the end of the day.
Yeah, they innovated YA fiction. I mean, they were the first ones to really write for teens, and so they get a lot of credit for creating a cultural movement. But yeah, it was real sleazy.
Leslie McFarlane has a memoir actually called The Ghost of the Hardy Boys, which I didn't get to read, but apparently it's quite interesting because he's kind of an interesting character. He wrote like, was it 19 out of the first 25?
Something like that, yeah.
They would send him these treatments, but he kind of like built out the world and the lived-in component of it. Like the town of Bayport is based on his hometown in Ontario, this sort of thing. So it is kind of interesting, despite we'll get into a lot of the issues with the book, the way that this guy who was complaining about writing these books for like $50 so he can buy firewood ended up kind of creating this little universe.
It's also interesting too that when the books came out, they were really panned by critics and a lot of establishment types. So like libraries would refuse to carry any of these Hardy Boys books. They also did the Nancy Drew books, which are kind of the girl equivalent of the Hardy Boys. The books were thought to cause, quote, mental laziness and fatal sluggishness. And it would ruin a child's chances of gaining an appreciation for good literature. There was also the way that the cops are portrayed in the Hardy Boys books is not very flattering. So it was thought that the books also undermine respect for authority and contempt for social conventions. There was this guy, Franklin K. Matthews. He was chief librarian for the Boy Scouts of America. And he wrote an article called, I mean, you wouldn't call it this today, but Blowing Out the Boys' Brains, where he criticized, he aired a lot of these criticisms of the Hardy Boys franchise.
And they were, like, you both kind of mentioned it, but it was a major craze. Like this also spawned off the Nancy Drew series, which was in some ways even more influential than Hardy Boys because it was the first major series targeted at girls. And it was also much more, bizarrely more successful than the Hardy Boys. It sold more than 200 million copies. And yeah, it kind of sparked off this like youth reading craze that wasn't really seen again until like the Harry Potter series. And you know, I actually looked back and read some articles about the initial Harry Potter craze in like the early 2000s, and people were referencing like, oh, kids haven't been reading books like this since the Hardy Boys, which now seems insane because nobody talks about the Hardy Boys anymore. I also read a review of all the books by a guy from the New York Review of Books called Daniel Lefferts, who had a great quote. It just says, it's hard to imagine a product more mainstream, more embedded in the very DNA of America than the Hardy Boys. I mean, they were a major part of like growing up for that mid-century American suburban, largely white families. And it represented everything, like all of their ideals about being tough. You have know-how, heterosexual, but you're non-sexual, you know, you're masculine. And of course you're white. It's it's so influential and so representative of the US at that time.
And also this thing that like kind of established a model for like IPs. You know, how it just every like creative work now is like just this IP that you build out a universe in. And even with, you know, like restructuring them, retrofitting them, the Hardy Boys doing that in the 60s when they started doing these re-releases of the original books that are like with completely different plots or different things sanitized, that sort of thing. I was thinking about that. I'm like, that's like so much like how all these different film franchises and TV series operate now. But I'm sure we'll get to that later because this book, there's two versions of it. There's the 1933 one that we're like officially reviewing. Then there was one re-released in 65.
Because the original was far too racist.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they updated the entire series. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that.
We can dive into the actual book in a second. But before we do, since the readers probably didn't read the previous 12 Hardy Boys books, just to let them know what's been established in the Hardy Boys world at this point by the time of book number 13. So the Hardy Boys are two brothers, Frank and Joe. You pretty much, they're almost completely indistinguishable, except Frank is usually older, 17, 18, and has dark hair. And Joe is usually younger and he has light hair. And that's the only distinctions you ever really get between them. They also, some articles say Frank is more of like the thinker and Joe is more the doer. I personally didn't feel that at all in reading these books and found them, they're completely impossible to tell apart.
I see Frank as kind of the Grant Ashcroft and Joe is kind of the Bo Dashington.
Which one's which? I'm the doer. I'm the impulsive athletic one. Okay.
You're the one with lighter hair.
The high tea guy?
Yeah. Sorry, which Hardy Boy had higher testosterone? Was that established?
Yeah.
It was Frank. He was the sporty athletic type.
They live in some made up town called Bayport in Barmet Bay, which in different books is reported to be in different states, apparently. Sometimes it's New Jersey, sometimes it's Massachusetts. Importantly, their father is a retired NYPD detective, and they want to be just like him when they grow up. So they're constantly solving mysteries. It's one of those things where you have to suspend disbelief about the amount of nonsense that takes place in this small town. There's espionage, kidnapping, smuggling, trafficking, bank robbery, international
Midsummer
incidents.
Murders.
It's Midsummer Murders. Yeah, it's something like that. It's like a Norman Rockwell painting, but with crime that is all okay in the end, like the Scooby-Doo mysteries or something like that. There's no one's ever
that's
really
a real
in
update reference. Those are the hip modern references that we're looking for here.
Yeah, Norman Rockwell and Scooby-Doo. Yeah, that's the world. Should we start talking about the actual book and the plot of the book, and then we'll pick out some key themes along the way? Spoiler alert: one of them is going to be racism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's get into the dirty laundry.
One thing that's really frustrating about this book, we chatted about this beforehand, is there's kind of is a plot, but there also isn't. It's just a series of stuff that happens that in no particular order, and they're not really solving a mystery. I think that's what I found really frustrating. They're just kind of bumbling from one scene to the next, doing things that don't really make any sense and taking part in some, bizarrely sexist and racist activities. I have to admit, when I started reading the book, I made the first thing I wrote in my notes was like how long until they say something sexist or racist and which one's going to come first. The book wasn't as sexist as I thought. Definitely is. Definitely, we'll get to the racism. But anyway, the book starts with the boys are hanging out at home and they get a message that Aunt Gertrude is coming to visit. And Aunt Gertrude is an old battle axe, always telling them what to do. So they got to clean the house. They got to do the laundry. So where are they going to go for the laundry? They're going to go see their friend Sam Lee, who is, and this is according to Joe, the best Chinese laundryman in town. They go down to the Chinese laundry, but unfortunately for them, Sam Lee is nowhere to be found, and instead we are introduced to the main antagonist of the book, a guy called Louis Fong. Boo. Do either of you want to take up the physical description of Louis Fong? Chip?
I
So we're going to have a few a few clips from the book. None of us were willing to read them. So, and I'm not usually a big proponent of AI. However, we're going to let AI read some of the book. Louis Fong is described in a really kind of like stereotypic way. He's basically a Fu Manchu character with,
100%.
Described as extremely yellow. He's horribly evil looking.
Cat-like.
Cat-like, yeah. I'm going to share.
And do we have a special guest reader?
We have a special guest reader. I'll let you see for yourself who it is. Here's how Louis Fong is introduced. There we go.
Steam issued in a cloud from the front door, and when the boys stepped inside, the evil face of Louis Fong popped up from behind the counter like a jack-in-the-box. "Hello, you come for Lonley?" "No got," Louis Fong said sharply. "What's the idea?" demanded Frank. "Sally!" "No got." "Tomola, maybe?" "That's another day lost," complained Joe. "Why weren't you working yesterday? That's why we can't have our laundry today." "No worky yesterday," said Louis Fong. "Big Chinese holiday." "Go, Vay," he ordered shrilly. "Why you come here and talky, ask question. Lonely not Letty until Tomola. Go, Vay. Come back Tomola.
So I used the same app as you in order to read this book, and I had the same gentleman read me the book, Mr. Burt Reynolds. Another modern reference, and like hearing Burt Reynolds bumble through offensive Chinese pidgin English is just like it brings the book to the next level.
It was almost kind of hard to know which kind of clip to use to kind of strike the right balance of showing the racism of the book, but not trying to almost perpetuate what the book's actually doing. But the Asian Chinese characters, almost all of them, always speak like this, right? In this horrible cartoonish caricature, except for the one good Asian, Sam Lee, who speaks it. They even make a point of saying he speaks perfect English and has no hint of an accent. But all the suspicious ones, the bad ones, they speak like this.
Yeah. It's also like the description of the Chinese characters as well, or by other characters in the book, the use of the word, let's just say Chinese gentleman, maybe we could say, instead of the actual term they use for them. I'm sure listeners know what I'm getting at, but the racial epithet for Chinese gentleman shows up like 180 times in the book across like 180 pages. It's like the only way that those characters are described, aside from other things like Oriental or yellow or ugly. It's kind of interesting because a lot of the books we cover are, let's say, going against the grain for their contemporary sensibilities a little bit, and maybe they're proposing something that's like misogynistic outside of the realm of how most people feel. But this one is kind of just expressing what was normal and standard at that time, and how much it beats you over the head, that how ugly and villainous immediately these like Chinese characters are is quite stunning.
It's not only Chinese people that the book has total contempt for. The book also really hates fat people. And one of the additional characters is the two Hardy Boys have a best friend whose name is Chet Morton, who I think is also, I think we might have had a Chet Morton chair the podcast at some point. But Chet Morton is basically their bumbling friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he is like, the book goes out of its way to constantly remind you what a fat, dumb piece of shit this kid is.
Right.
Like, it's constant. He's always described as either plump or fat. He's often just referred to as their fat friend or their plump chum. He's constantly asking them for food. They make fun of him for being fat. He's at one scene for no specific reason. He just wanders off and comes back shoving a, quote, tremendous wedge of pie into his face.
That's classic comedy.
He goes for pie at two separate occasions during this book. And another point, he takes an apple out of his pocket. He polishes on his sleeves and destroys it with one bite. And just like, he's just a fat, dumb kid.
He's sort of the Chip Wilson of the Hardy Boys world, I think.
Right.
Another part of contempt, can I say one thing I did like, actually, that's very early in the book? I do like the contempt for the police. Especially compared to the other book, the rewrite of it. The only real time they interact with a police officer in this, I think it's written in a fairly genuinely kind of funny way, where he's like unhelpful to them. There's someone that's trapped in a phone booth, and he's like kind of like, oh well, that's on the property of this person. Oh, blah blah blah. I'm going to take care of the property of people before someone that's in danger. This sort of thing. So I thought that was kind of funny. Grant alluded to it, but like a contempt for authority and of like the adult world being a bunch of bumbling idiots. So that I did like that.
And the ghostwriter Leslie McFarlane actually addressed that in that memoir of his that you referenced, where he said, like, because it was a point of criticism. He's like, why shouldn't kids be aware that sometimes people in authority are idiots, and the world is sometimes led by fools? I'm paraphrasing, but that was sort of his general sentiment.
Yeah, it's slightly subversive in that regard, in that it's challenging authority. And as I think you might have mentioned in the opening comments, Grant, this was all completely removed from the rewrites in the 60s. Authority was taken much more seriously. The cops were always very serious and helpful. But you can also see why it happens for the plot of the book, right? The authorities can't, in this small town, can't quite solve these big crimes, so the Hardy Boys have got to step in and do their bit.
And the world is like kind of nice and lived in a way. And there's like the Marshall McLuhan quote that like you don't read the morning newspaper, you get into it like a warm bath, that kind of thing. I think when we're talking about the plot and like how important the plot is in the book, it's more about just kind of like settling into that town of Bayport and the characters are walking around. And it does feel kind of like weirdly, despite all the issues with it, feels like kind of genuine and lived in a way.
Yeah, there's an effort at world building for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not to go back to the dated references, but it's the literary equivalent of a Norman Rockwell painting, right? It's this like this lily white, perfect, nostalgic view of Americana at this time, and that that perfect little town, perfect setting is being destroyed by these immigrants who were coming into it and ruining it.
There's an interesting quote I read from this was like a cultural critic, but so when the original publisher died, as I mentioned, his daughters took over this publishing syndicate, and Harriet Adams at times had rebuked Leslie McFarlane, the ghostwriter, for not sufficiently following her instructions regarding portrayal of African American characters. So this is not specific to this book, but this is more general. And so this critic, and I'm quoting here, whether Adams rewrote parts of McFarlane's manuscripts to add racist details, or to what extent these early texts would now be considered even more notoriously racist had McFarlane followed Adams' instructions more carefully. So basically, that as racist as this book is, the publisher wanted it to be more racist, and he toned it down.
Yeah, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's definitely, you feel a cynicism in the rewrites as well when it comes to why they tone down some of the racism. Because in the later editions, a lot of the overt slurs and negative descriptions of non-white people are removed, but there's still like a clear underlying narrative of the danger of the other, that sort of thing. So it does, it does seem consistent with that.
So the plot continues, the plot thickens. We've got our enemy Louis Fong and his gang of Chinese immigrants. We've got the Hardy Boys with their ally Chet Morton. I'm just going to skip most of the plot because most of it is just so uninteresting and complicated. Like there's a guy posing as another guy, and they find both guys, and like, why are you posing as this other guy? And it never really pays off in an interesting way.
A massive red herring that goes nowhere. Yeah, I think the plot is kind of secondary to what's interesting about this book. So
yeah, true. But just to kind of lay out the plot, there's someone snooping around the Hardy Boys' house. And they do some investigating, and they find some footprints under the window, just like in the title. And they measure the footprints. They're weirdly obsessed with measuring footprints in this book. They kind of find out about this guy, Orrin North, who's a local fishing magnate, who's been hired by their dad to do some investigating. But they want to investigate I almost said Louis Theroux. What's his name? Louis Fong. They want to
investigate him too. He was buddies with Jimmy Savile. I mean, it's worth looking into.
They go to this bar called Lantern Land, where they're going to poke around and try to find more about this Louis Fong. And that's where they come across another of the bad stereotype characters, whose name is Tom Watt. And Tom Watt is kind of a victim of a stabbing, and he hates Louis Fong, but for some reason he refuses to say why. And it's still, I mean, the only reason he doesn't say anything is because that would solve the mystery right from the beginning, right? The Hardy Boys are seen, there's a fight, they run away with Tom, and for some reason, they decide that the only way that Tom Watt can survive safely is if they dress him up as a woman. And so they take a costume of one of the burlesque dancers and then force this man to wear it.
And it's because of his, his feminine features and his lithe frame and so on.
Chet loves it, I think, doesn't he?
Yeah. Chet Morton's got a Hardy on for the for
nicely done
for Tom Watt. Chet Morton says he looks like a swell-looking lady. Or sorry, she looks like a swell-looking lady because he thinks it is a lady. But there's no specific reason why they make him dress up. I think this is the part where the sort of the cruelty of the humor and of the view really comes out, of like just how fucking much these kids love laughing at this guy, this grown man that a bunch of teenagers have forced to dress in women's clothing. And that's where I would play the second of our audio clips.
Welcome in, Mr. Reynolds.
This one might not be Mr. Reynolds.
The boys heard a violent pounding from the vicinity of a closet at the end of the hall. "Don't let him out," shrieked the nurse. "He'll murder us all." "It's a Chinaman," screamed Aunt Gertrude. "A Chinaman?" exclaimed Joe. Frank seized the knob, turned the key, and stepped back. Out tumbled Tom Watt, with the girl's hat down over one eye and the skirt dragging about his heels. "Me aflaid of lady," he babbled. "Muchie aflaid of lady. Her locking me up." The Hardy Boys roared with laughter. Joe sat down on the floor, weak with mirth at the spectacle of the bedraggled and frightened Chinaman.
Yeah, it's like they love torturing this man.
Mm-hmm. It's like the wellspring of mirth in this book is this guy dressed up as a lady. It's like there's several bits where they're just falling over laughing about it.
Great choice of John Wayne too, because John Wayne. If you ever see his portrayal of Genghis Khan, he just went full yellow face. So he's a man who knows what he's talking about here.
Yeah, that's right up there with Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney's bit in Breakfast at Tiffany's is, I think, one of Hollywood's worst.
That might be worse.
If not, both of them are pretty bad.
A couple more up-to-date references for you kids out there.
Can I also comment on this? The central plot is there's these revolves around human trafficking, basically.
Yes,
with these Chinese immigrants coming in or getting smuggled in and so on. This is the first time in the book that the Hardy Boys themselves start smuggling around one of the Chinese men. First of several.
And it's about this time that they find their old friend Sam Lee, who basically spills the beans. And that's the point that we learn that the fishing magnate Orrin Hatch is working with Louis Fong to smuggle Chinese immigrants in the country, where they're essentially being held as slaves, like indentured labor, by Louis Fong. And then we get to we're basically at the final scene already, because there's really not that much happens in the book. Yeah, the Hardy Boys get themselves dressed up in grease paints, and their father's old undercover accent from when he was doing some investigating in Chinatown, and they transform themselves, according to the book, into very realistic disguises, and then they go to try to trap Louis Fong. Yeah. But they're rumbled because they forget to speak in their pidgin English, and their father comes at that moment. He walks in, and Louis Fong says, "Ha ha, we've trapped you." And the father basically says, "No, you didn't. I knew what was going on the whole time." And then a bunch of cops burst in, beat everyone up, arrest all the Chinese guys apart from Sam Lee, and then that's the end of the book. And they realize that the secret footprints under the window were actually their dad, because he was snooping around the whole time doing some investigating at the same time they were, which basically means that nothing they did served any purpose. They didn't really contribute towards actually solving the crime, and the entire book is just kind of a waste of time.
Investigating the investigators.
No investigates the investigator. That's a book. I found the book really kind of bit of a chore to get through. It's not interesting. It's not there isn't I thought it'd be more like a crime thriller, where you're actually trying to find out what's going on. And it's really boring. There's no action. And this probably isn't the worst thing about the book. Why the fuck is it called Footprints Under the Window? Why isn't it called The Case of the Dirty Laundry? It's right there. Like it's that title's right there.
I didn't mind the book so much, to be honest with you. You know, besides the fact that it's dated and offensive and everything like that, I thought it was actually kind of a breezy read, especially compared to some of the other trash books that we've struggled through in recent book club meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this, like, compared to trying to read Chariots of the Gods or Steven Seagal's novel, like this was a treat.
Yeah, and I thought for like 1933, it was like quite modern. You can see why it was, so influential and such a hit. It moved quickly. Like you said, the plot wasn't interesting in the sense that, like, in like a fun spy book or thriller, you sit down and think about things and they all come together nicely. It's less about like a kind of something that comes together with coherent logic, and it's more like kind of these bits, chapter by chapter. Yeah. There's like these little set pieces, and this happens. They're out on the boat and they have to dodge this rock, that sort of thing.
But for a 100-year-old book, I thought it was like a really sort of modern portrayal, as you say, of teen culture. You often hear about rock and roll and America's top 40 and transistor radios being the birthplace or the nucleus of teen culture in America. But this, there's kids, they have a roadster, they're driving around in their car, hanging out with their buddies, they're grab ass and they're palling around. Like this is teens having fun.
They are not, excuse me, I'm stepping in here. They were not grab assing. That was absolutely not. But the most sexual thing that happens is I think Joe calls one girl swell looking. And I think it's Chet's sister.
And also the Asian fella in the lady's dress gets called a swell-looking dame as well. But that's true. You're right. Maybe not a lot of grab ass.
But it is that kind of, like, as Chip kind of mentioned before, it's more about the kind of the world of just stepping into that place of like this simpler slice of Americana, where you're tough and you're doing the right thing and you're driving around in your jalopy with your pals and you're bullying minorities, and it's just kind of like, oh, what a swell time.
The good old days.
There were aspects that I thought were kind of interesting, but then there's one reading I wanted to share. I got a friend of the show, Kevin O'Leary, to read this one.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, like the way that the Hardy Boys are so fascinated and also terrified by these Chinese people they're interacting with, even before they really know what's going on, just by seeing them at first. So this is like a quote from early on when they're reflecting on the first time that they some of the early hijinks that they got into with the Chinese down at the dock.
The rain had settled to a steady downpour. I think I'll dream of Chinamen tonight, yawned Frank as he took off his shoes, what with Sam Lee and Louis Fong and the Chinamen on the dock. And the Chinaman who talked to Mr. Pebbles, and that story he told us, added Joe. However, neither of the lads dreamed of Chinamen, for they slept heavily.
I just thought that was one of the craziest passages I've read.
There's another section where they're like, well, because the stern aunt dreams of a Chinese person in the house as well. Mm-hmm. And she's like, yeah, was there any Chinese people in the house? They're like, Chinese people in the house? Absolutely. What are you talking about? Like, don't be outrageous. Of course there's no Chinese people in the house.
Mm-hmm. But that also doesn't pay off, right?
No.
There was no, she actually was dreaming.
No, it was the dad who was in the house because he stole his own papers.
He might have been still in his old disguise from his previous.
Why did she think he was a China? But then, but why is he sneaking around? It's his house.
But that was just like an old fear. Like one of the things I reflected on when I was reading this book is because it's no doubt that there's still a tremendous amount of anti-Asian racism in American and North American culture, but this sort of specific, like being scared of Chinese people is like, there's something unique maybe to this period, or it was the racism in that period was sort of was really punctuated by this fear of Chinese people taking over. And so there was one time, now my grandma was like a lovely old lady, but she was visiting the city where I lived as a kid, and we took her for a walk through Chinatown, and she was like holding on to my mom's arm, And my mom said later, like, she started digging into my arm so hard that I thought she was going to leave marks on my arm. And we're like, what's all that about? And later, so I guess my dad talked to her and found out that, like, she's terrified of Chinese people. Like, not so much that she hates them. It's not that kind of bigotry, but just like completely terrified of Chinese people because she thought that she might get trafficked into the white slave trade. And it's like, okay, even on the off chance that, you know, the guy who runs the Chinese fruit and veg mart in Chinatown is running some sort of 1930s white slave racket, he's not looking for 75-year-old grandmas. Like, you've aged out of this one. It's not something you have to be too concerned about, grandma. So it was like, it's, you know, this seems like a real anachronism, this specific type of racism, but it's, you know, it was alive and well in some of our seniors.
It's like a true phobia. Like
actually afraid. Yeah,
it's like guys who are homophobic who like are in genuine panic anytime they're around gay guys. Like this different.
Yeah, I guess it's like the Chinese version of gay panic.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say, like, honestly, these days it's, I don't know, it doesn't seem necessarily that anachronistic. At least the way that a lot of people are comfortable talking about immigrants these days. I would say probably more directed towards like the South Asian community. At least here, it's pretty shocking what people will say in casual conversation or what goes for acceptable within polite society right now.
Well, and I guess if you want to look at the sort of geopolitical situation as well, there is an intense anxiety around mainland China and what kind of threat they pose to our way of life in the West.
But I showed Speed solved that. He went to China. He fixed everything. He did his big streams there, and nobody's worried about China anymore.
Nice. Okay, good stuff.
I'm trying to do a modern reference.
Yeah.
Nice. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Speaking of modern and modernizing, this book was, of course, modernized in 1965, and the book was the publishers decided to strip back a whole bunch of the first 20 or so Hardy Boys books, and to make a number of changes. Number one was they were consciously actually trying to remove a lot of the racism, but also, as I think Chip mentioned earlier, putting in more respect for authority, but also streamlining the plots and removing anything literary or removing any big words. I didn't read it, but Chip, I believe you did.
Yeah, it's updated for 1965. It's re-released, same name. So with these re-releases, some of them they would like do a completely different plot and just keep the name of the book. Sometimes they rework the plot a little bit. This one stays quite close to the original, except, you know, in terms of removing racism and stuff, I don't know how much they really accomplished that goal, because they just replaced Chinese with South Americans. They don't use the same kind of, there's no real slurs, but people are described as, you know, swarthy, bushy eyebrows, dark complexioned individuals. They're called aliens quite often as well. But they're almost, I would say that the sort of villainous minority in this case are almost presented as like more of a threat than they are in the original. Because in the remake, they're all spies that are operating on behalf of a dictatorship on an island just south of the U.S., which is obviously a placeholder for Cuba. And what happens in this book is what's introduced that's different than the original is that there's like a secret military satellite that's being developed in Bayport for some reason. I'm not really sure why.
Fun.
Yeah, not really sure why. And so all the South Americans that are getting smuggled in and spying are trying to get information on this thing. When you mentioned that it's written to have more respect for authority, one thing that comes through is like the Hardy Boys, for some reason, this one are just always cooperating with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or its equivalent at that time. And so they're meeting with them like, their Hardy Boys are meeting with them like every 2 chapters and like reporting on all these dark complexion fellows that they keep running into.
Thanks.
And they're like, yeah, exactly. And so when you read it now, I'm like, I don't know, like, this seems equally or just as bad on the sort of xenophobic or racist front. It's also shorter, and the parts the criticism you spoke to on the plot, Bo, where things just kind of happen. It's just these punches of action that feel like filler. So it's much worse. I would say, actually, than the original book, despite the fact that the language is sanitized a little bit. Mm-hmm. Oh, and sorry, one more thing that makes it even worse. They take the footprints thing, right? So same thing, same plot point. There's footprints outside their window. Those turn out to be his dad's at the end. It's just this like red herring. But the gang they're pursuing in this is also just randomly called the Footprints Gang for no reason in particular. And
it's lazy.
The island nation that's like a placeholder for Cuba is called it's Spanish for footprints as well. So they just, I don't really know why, but they just throw these things in there to keep with the title.
So if there was a 1965 revamp, did you know that there is a 2026 unvamp, if that's a word? There's a right-wing American press called Passage Publishing, led by this guy called Jonathan Keeperman, who's basically, with big support from like Steve Bannon and a bunch of others, has started this publishing company whose goal is to publish sort of right-wing political stuff that has been hashtag canceled and needs to be brought back. So they've started republishing just at the end in December of 2025 and then into this year, started republishing the original versions of the Hardy Boys series. They haven't got to this one yet, but it looks like they're going to be republishing this so that avid readers across the US can get back to the original text before the woke fake news media mob came and brainwashed everyone into believing them that horrible racism was wrong.
Well, the book is in the public domain as far as I know, but it's good to see that Steve Bannon is still up to important work.
Well, I was going to say, these grifters are always one step ahead of us, because I was going to suggest we do that. Not as a right-wing thing, but with the books all entering public domain, the original ones, they're ripe for doing your own thing with the Hardy Boys right now. You could do like a Wicked treatment of this, where like Louis Fong and Sam Lee following their backgrounds before they.
Yeah, that's really popular. There was a book, James, by what was his name, Percival Everett, that was looking at the character Jim, who's from the Mark Twain series. His name usually has the N-word in front of it. They're telling the story from his perspective. Yeah, so you're right. There should be a Louis Fong's Dirty Laundry. There's a real chance there.
It's ripe for that kind of stuff. So I hope some people hop on it, that maybe people other than Steve Bannon
can profit from it. Speaking of the other books in the series, I didn't take a look at the Redux version, but I did take a look at two of the other books. There's basically kind of like a racism trifecta within the Hardy Boys. Books 12, 13, and 14. So this one, Footprints Under the Window, is 12. 13 is it's called The Mark on the Door, where the gang encounters basically African Americans. And 14 is where they go to Mexico.
Yeah, ghostwriter Leslie McFarlane must have been going through some difficult social issues or period in his life when he wrote those three in a row. Like,
not enough firewood for the winter. It's like freezing cold, hunched over his typewriter in Northern Ontario, writing a racist screed.
Never met a Chinese guy or a black guy in his life, too.
It's
like way up in Temiskaming.
Up in worst case Ontario. This is the stuff that was allegedly not racist enough for the publisher as well. According to the
The second book as well. I'm going to play one more clip from this book because the plot's really simple. It's basically someone's been stealing from one of the local wealthy people in town, and that guy employs several African Americans, and it turns out that the African Americans have been stealing from the guy that employs them. The Hardy Boys kind of track down the mystery. They work with another African American kid who's basically their friend, who talks like normally, not as a caricature. Sort of the same thing as the previous book, where the one good minority, speaks like a white suburban middle class kid. But this book takes a really dark turn. Basically, once the crimes have been exposed and the guilty parties have been found, the town finds out that these African American kids have been stealing, and they are not that happy about it. And so they take matters into their own hands.
The mob, inflamed with anger, immediately jumped to the conclusion that the Hardy Boys had been accomplices. "Lynch them," went up the cry. The street was now crowded, and the Hardy Boys were roughly handled by the infuriated people. A rope seemed to come from nowhere, his loop settling down over Evol and the Hardy Boys. "Throw the rope over that bow and string 'em up," yelled someone in a rough voice. Cheers greeted the suggestion. The three prisoners were thrust forward to what seemed to them certain doom. The rope tightened. There was a mighty pull, and the three struggling figures were hauled into the air.
Yikes.
So, yeah, the Hardy Boys are lynched because of their association with a black guy, who is obviously also lynched. They escape. That shouldn't have to tell you that. Obviously, they're going to escape. They escape, but man, that book gets dark.
So what do we, we're probably coming up towards the end of our discussion here. How do we kind of tie a bow on this? What's the Jerry Springer final thought of all this?
I think that one thing, at least for me, that stood out about them, or at least when you do an exercise like this, reading an old book, it's like, of course, there's going to be a lot of like racism and in terms, descriptions, plot points that you wouldn't see now. But I guess it's like a useful exercise as a reminder of like what was commonplace at the time. Like this is not a fringe book by any stretch. These are the most popular books, some of the most popular books at the time. And they also, I think, kind of like in Footprints, they said a lot of these, there's a lot of like comic ideas and things like that you still saw in like Hollywood for like decades and decades after, with guys dressed up in yellowface and so on.
Peter Sellers made a Fu Manchu movie in the 80s. I mean,
yeah,
it was...
like this, I don't know. This stuff was also so recent and still an issue in a lot of places right now. So I don't know. I found it like a good reminder, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Good. Well, anything else that you wanted to add, Dr. Dashington, before we wrap today's meeting?
For concluding thoughts, though, I don't. I think, Chip said it best. I think these books are kind of interesting to look at and try to get a glimpse on why they were so popular and really how influential they are, and in some ways really ahead of their time in terms of like, mass marketing some sort of IP, and undercutting writers, but also just that even in like the most American things possible, you find just really, really shocking, offensive, overt racism that is, unfortunately, nowadays, not only is it not acknowledged, but now potentially even being celebrated, as publishers want this type of stuff to be back out there again.
It's interesting. Yeah, I wonder how much of that I absorbed as a kid reading these books that didn't really even register with me consciously, but maybe perhaps had imprinted on me. I had no idea that the Hardy Boys were right-wing villains. I always thought of them as just, pure Americana. But once again, we've ruined another franchise.
Pure Americana. I think, but was this our first book written by a Canadian author?
Yeah, I think it was. I had to say the exact same thought. I meant to
Hamlet.
say something about that.
I'm going to put this front and center in our application for Council of Arts funding.
Please do. Exhibit A. Yeah. I look forward to that grant.
I wonder if that says something odd about racism in Canada. As you both mentioned before, this guy was in the middle of nowhere in Northern Ontario, probably interacted with very, very few minorities. There's probably some type of difference between an American type of racism, where it's racism between minorities that live in that community, like between white people and African Americans in the South, and a racism from a country that's almost entirely British European, apart from a minority native community that's largely pushed off into reserves and outlying places. And the real racism in the literature and in the popular culture comes from people who've never even interacted with the minorities that they're creating these stereotypes about. To be completely honest with you, it reminds me of some of my people from my hometown, including family members, who have really racist views from people from countries they've never been to and have never met, who love like complaining about Mexicans and all, just the worst dumb stereotypes of Mexicans that have been online. It's like, you fucking never met a Mexican. Why on earth are you racist against them?
Absolutely. It's one thing that's funny that I noticed is he mentions in the book specifically that talking about the high head tax on Chinese and how the smuggling them is a way to avoid it. It was only Canada that had that higher head tax on Chinese. The US had different exclusionary laws, but so he accidentally snuck in a specifically Canadian policy into the book.
That's interesting. Yeah, because as far as I knew, the U.S. just outright banned East Asian immigration at that time. And so I was trying to reconcile that because I was like, I thought the head tax was, U.S. had it before, but at that point had basically abolished it because they had sort of gone a little bit further.
Yeah.
And so that clears that up because I was trying to make sense of that.
I think he was just wrong, and he was just accidentally sneaking in the Canadian experience a little bit there.
Right. All right. Well, having no further business to attend to this meeting, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I submit a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a seconder?
I submit to the motion.
You second the motion.
No, I submit to it.
All right. Well, whatever. We'll get this eventually. So
at least we showed up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Showing up is like half the battle. Thank you, book club members, so much for sticking it out to the end of a kind of an unpleasant book club meeting today. We love having you with us. Really, we wouldn't be able to do this without all of the fantastic book club members that show up each and every meeting. We would love to hear from you. We had put out a call for voicemails last meeting. We didn't get any, so we're putting it out again. Look for the link in the show description. Send us a voicemail. Visit us at posbookclub.com. Visit our subreddit, our Piece of Chip Book Club. We are on YouTube at POS Book Club. And you can always email us at posbookclub@gmail.com. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Meeting adjourned.